the couples who come in and say, we're fighting all the time, we're not getting along, and because I'm a mental health guy, I just say, okay, first I want to assess what's your mood like, and one or both is either angry, depressed, negative, can't stop worrying, and so that just is so totally disruptive to a relationship. So when I assess a marriage, when a couple comes to see me for the first time, the first thing I want to know is, do you have any problems with depression, anxiety, or mood swings? Because 15 to 20% of the population has one of these conditions. 80% of the people affected don't know it.
Does it have to be treated with medication?
Yeah, well, if they come to see me, it does.
Okay.
In other words, if it's bad enough to come to see me, yes. But it's as simple as this. If you can control your thoughts, then it's not a mood disorder, then counseling is sufficient. You don't need medicines. Okay. But if you can't shut your mind off for long periods of time, like years, then you need medications for that. It's just like blurred vision, you know. If your vision's only slightly blurred, you can manage.
When you say you can't shut your mind off, typically then, what would that person be thinking about most of the time?
Well, if they have a depressive disorder, then their mind is constantly drifting into negative thoughts of any type. But if it's an anxiety disorder, they're more worried and fearful. But usually it's a combination of both. I mean, depression and anxiety are pretty much inseparable.
Like twins,
yeah,
like cousins at least.
If you have one, you're going to have some of the other.
Okay.
And so that what happens is your mind drifts into directions you don't want it to go, but you can't stop it. And so that's what a mood disorder is. And in bipolar, you go from drivenness to crash, drivenness to crash.
And as the preacher, and I'm a pastor of a church, if I tell people don't be anxious because Jesus says don't be anxious, what are they going to feel?
Well, yes, if they have an anxiety disorder, they feel overwhelming shame and condemnation. And I saw them in my office. They'll say, the pastor told me to stop doing it. It's a sin. I've repented for it, and I can't stop it.
So let's put myself in the seat, and then I'm going to put you in the seat. All right, I'm going to come in and I'm saying, I want to improve on my marriage relationship. Mm-hmm. You're going to check me out. You're going to ask me some questions. Mm-hmm. What are you going to ask me?
Well, the first thing, after the pleasantries, then I want to know, have you ever been diagnosed with a mood problem? Or do you suffer with depression, anxiety, or mood swings, and can you shut your mind off? You have to get that out of the way first.
So let's say I say no to those, but I'm not excited about my marriage.
Yeah, well,
I'd like it to be better.
Then you move on to the next step. You see, there are 3 parts to humans and 3 parts that have a massive effect on how we think, feel, and relate to others. And so that's body, soul, and spirit.
Okay.
So in the physical realm, that's the mood disorders, because those are physical conditions that interfere with how you think, feel, relate to others. Huge marriage problem. But in the spirit realm, Satan just wants to influence your mind. He wants to put his thoughts into your mind, take advantage of any bad habit, anything from your past. And then in the third part is your soul or personality. And your soul or personality is shaped by the events of your past and the conclusions that you made about those events. In other words, how you interpreted that.
Okay.
And that shapes your past. That's the baggage you bring into your marriage. And so all 3 of those areas have a huge impact on your marriage. So when you're assessing a marriage, I always start with the mental health first, because no one ever talks about that.
No.
They spend all kinds of time in counseling not realizing that one or both has a mood problem. So I start there, and then if the person has no problem with their mood, then you move on to the other areas.
You've already, I think, given a partial answer to a few things, but I want to just, let's zero in on a couple of the tough things, okay? I think it's point 2, that whole spiritual dynamic, but when somebody comes in and says, my marriage has gotten cold, I don't have any feeling, I don't love her anymore, she doesn't love me anymore, where do you go from there?
Well, how did that start? Where did that come from?
Because I don't think anybody wakes up on a particular day, you know, the day after you get married and say, well, in 5 years from now, I think I would like to be done with this and move on.
Mm-hmm. A career change.
Yeah, career change.
Yeah. Well,
with kids.
Like you look at what has happened over those years. And what we discovered actually through the marriage crisis that my wife and I went through is that to us, the #1 cause of marriage failure isn't the person you married, it's the baggage that you each brought into the marriage that all accumulated before you knew each other.
Is that called emotional baggage?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and so this is, because my wife, we learned this the hard way, because we had a marriage crisis at year 13 of our marriage, and we had to go to a counselor who taught us all this stuff, because there's no pill for emotional baggage.
Was it hard to go to a counselor?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, I'm used to being on the other side of the desk. Yeah.
Okay, was it hard for your wife to go, though?
Oh, no. Women have no problem going to counselors, but it's harder for guys, especially harder for professional guys who give advice for a living.
Exactly.
So it was awkward to be on the other side of the desk. and to be told that, well, you're all so messed up, I have to see you separately.
Okay, let's, well, I appreciate your transparency and being honest that way. Was this part of the things that God was using in your life to
train me?
Yeah, because you're giving out advice to people during the day, but you're not doing it yourself.
Well, in my mental health clinic...
Did I read that right?
Somewhat.
Somewhat.
But you see...
That was a little harsh, maybe?
Oh, no. At that point in my life, I was focused on the medical treatment of mood disorders. I still didn't know about healing of the heart.
Oh.
So you see, this was all new information to me when we went to the counselor, who said, no, you two people, you have a baggage issue, a heart issue, and that's why you're not getting along. And then, we went to him for marriage counseling. He says, no, I have to see you separately because you have so many personal issues from your own baggage from your past, like your upbringing. I have to see you separately, and then once we resolve your baggage issues, then I'll see you together. And the funny thing happened, well, it wasn't very funny. We spent 1.5 years sorting out our own issues, 1.5 years being seen separately.
Oh, wow.
Then he said, all right, now
so you don't get this solved in 7 days?
I wish. No. And so he finally brought us back together after we had spent a lot of time working, settling issues from our own past. And then he said, so how are you doing? I said, we're great. And he said, so what issues are still unresolved? He says, there's none. And so he said, oh, I'll see you then in a month and tell me how you're doing. And we had nothing to talk about because once I had dealt with my baggage, Kathy was so much easier to live with.
I remember hearing an old preacher talk about a friend of his wife, and he said that woman just drove him up the wall, and she would often come and stay for the weekend. And he said, finally one night, he said, when I was going to bed, he said, God, he said, how about we make a deal? I'll give you my feelings for her if you give me your feelings for her. He said the next morning he woke up and discovered what a beautiful woman she was. She was totally changed. Huh. And I never forgot that. It was kind of what you just reiterated
yes, very
right
similar.
Now.
Because Kathy's baggage and my baggage was interfering with our relationship. And once we cleared that off, we had no issues left of any significance. Any issues that were left, we could easily manage on our own.
Let's pick on the guys for a moment. I'm kind of biased that as men, we consciously and unconsciously add to our baggage. There's some very predictable things that we do. Any thoughts on that? Stuff that we need to just say, I got to get rid of this stuff right away.
You mean when it comes to marriage?
Yeah, just even our own selves, like what we bring. Like I'm thinking issues such as pornography, stuff that we can look at. I think of the way in the locker room, I still like to play pickup hockey, and it's very easy to listen in on the conversation. A lot of times it can be very demeaning towards women or men still trying to boast about what they think or thought they could have done or who they are. Let's just talk about that whole, the male psychic, being the tough, chauvinistic guy.
Yeah, well, those are all defense mechanisms to hide insecurity.
Explain that.
Yeah, so pornography is a way of treating emotional pain. Drinking is a way of treating emotional pain. Gambling is a way of treating emotional pain. And this bravado that you describe, this is a false front. We call this is a shame-based mask to hide your insecurity. And so if you're feeling insecure inside, you want to portray this front of, how masculine I am and, and how about those leaves? And so that this is a false front to hide insecurity. In fact, the more a person boasts, how much more insecure they really are. And so that's a huge marriage handicap because you don't want to be married to a mask. So people who are damaged by shame and have low self-esteem, low self-confidence, that's a baggage issue. That comes from the baggage circle. If they were raised in a really dysfunctional home and then they get married, then they in fact may be portraying themselves as a mask, and the spouse married a mask because the real self, they hate themselves. And so they have this false front and this male bravado.
You've written a book, and it's called Emotionally Free. Talk to me about the book. Well,
I divided the book into those 3 parts. The first third of the book is how to assess your mental health, your moods, from a Christian worldview, how God feels about these issues, and a Christian way of treating mood disorders with medical and spiritual. Then the second part of the book is how to understand spiritual conflict and how Satan is trying to influence your thoughts. So it's how to understand how to resist that. And then the third is how to do an inventory of your personality to see where your baggage is. Where it explains the most common types of baggage and the most common types of family situations that give rise to that, and then how God wants to heal you.
Boy, there's so much I want to talk about. I want to do a little plug, and then I'm going to come back and I want to talk to you about sex, just for 30 seconds.
Yeah, 30 seconds.
And then next week on our program, we're going to pick up more on that whole sexual component in marriage as well. But, so you become an author. You and your wife give seminars. Tell me briefly about the seminars.
Yeah, we have two streams of seminars. One's for marriages, where we take those three parts and explain how they affect relationships. And so we do marriage weekends, we do marriage retreats at a resort in the Dominican Republic every November for 5 days.
Okay.
And so we actually explain how all these three parts affect your marriage. And then we have a separate a weekend just that's for anybody, not couples, and it's called the Discover Joy Weekend. And it's really how we go through those three parts, because if you have any problems in one of those three parts, it's going to steal your joy.
Wow. I really love hearing about that. And right now we're going to run how across the bottom of the screen how people can find that information, how they can order your book, and helpful tools in the journey towards emotional wellness and relational wellness. Because as a man, we're listening to the programs, and oftentimes we're wired with our sexual thoughts. We're thinking, I want a better marriage because I want better sex. Mm-hmm. Is there a secret in a nutshell?
Well, that's crazy. I mean, that's just crazy talk, okay? I mean,
okay.
Sex is a part of marriage. Actually, sex is a celebration of unity. Okay?
Oh, I like that.
And so really, sex is a result of a very healthy, giving relationship. And so healthy relationships lead to great sex. Unhealthy relationships make for very dysfunctional sex, which sex actually can become a weapon and a tool of manipulation and control, which is very dark.
And that's what we hear so much about, unfortunately, in the news today. And we're also cognizant of that in so many relationships. We're going to ask you to come back next week and help us to unpack more of that as we...
More sex next week.
More sex next week, as we discover what it means to be emotionally free and discover how Christ is able to change our lives, because that is the key, that's the kingpin, isn't it?
Well, that's what happened to me. I mean, he changed me, that's why we teach it.
So there's hope. There's hope for you, there's hope for me, there's hope for all of us. We've been listening to Dr. Grant Mullen. We're going to be right back.